Still on the pile.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that's what I'm going to address today. Dee already has a copy of this book because I never stopped talking about it. She bought it on Vinted, but it's still on the pile. She hasn't cracked it open yet. That's what we're going to discuss in this session today. So we are Thursdays, 11 a.m. QT conversations. Once a month, we give it over to my nerdy book club. Dive into basically where all the thinking comes from and hopefully sort of push us all along together. Um, and this time I've chosen a book that is really meaty. And I think that's why it's taken me a lot. It's taken, what's TBR? To read, but books, is it TRB? To be read, thank you. The to be read books. Okay, thank you. I will do my best not to be distracted by the banter in the chat. So, my lovelies, this book, The Teacher Gap, written by Rebecca Allen and Sam Sims, is one of the most powerful books I've ever read on teaching and learning. And since I know you haven't read it, I am going to read you part of chapter one, and then we will discuss it together. So, are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. Chapter one, The Teacher Gap. Education is unique among the public services in its ability to propel people forward. Healthcare, social care, and policing are, of course, vital, but they focus on protecting people from risk or putting them back on their feet after misfortune. Only education gives us the power to go further. Learning is a source of dignity and an important element of human flourishing. Hard data now shows that it also makes us richer, healthier, and happier. Improving education is therefore the holy grail of public policy. But almost 100 years since secondary education became a right for every child in England, a good education is still not a reality for too many young people. In his inaugural professorial lecture at Durham University, Rob Coe assessed the performance of the English education system since 1994. Grade inflation and examination reform makes assessing this by comparing grade inflation and examination reform makes assessing this by comparing GCSE results in differing years difficult. So Coe gathered together all the data he could find on pupil attainment in a range of different international tests, allowing him to benchmark our pupils against those of a similar age in other countries. He also considered several studies which have carefully compared pupil standard over decades in English, maths, and science. His conclusion was bleak. Standards have not risen. Teaching has not improved. Other metrics tell a similar story. Each year, around 17% of pupils leave schools functionally illiterate. 12 years of compulsory education have got them almost nowhere. The gap in attainment between pupils who just make it into the top quarter of the richest families, the 75th percentile, and those who just make it into the third quarter of richest families, the 25th percentile, have remained high and broadly stable since the 1950s. Standards have proven stubbornly resistant to change, and inequalities have not closed. Ministers, I'm skipping a bit, are largely judged by their announcements, the white papers, parliamentary statements, and press releases by which they communicate their reform plans. The general public, of course, consume these announcements in shortened clips on the evening news, or while flicking through the newspapers over breakfast. You can tell that this book is slightly old. This creates a bias towards policies which are easy to describe in pithy, concrete language. Class sizes make for good announcements because everybody knows what you're talking about, and a pledge to cut them can be conveyed in a single sentence. A programme to replace old school buildings with modern facilities is even better, since the minister can also visit the school for a photo opportunity when it's reopened. Anything that involves spending more money on education has the air of a serious commitment. New school types are harder to communicate, but tend to go down well, since they appear to signal a clear break with whatever went before. A new way of doing things. Policy, therefore, tends towards the concrete and the intuitive. Unfortunately, tragically even, Research has consistently shown that these policies have little effect on pupil learning. A recent evaluation of the Building Schools for the Future policy found it had no impact whatsoever on pupil progress. School choice has a small effect at best, and even the most optimistic findings on class size suggest that it only has a very small impact and at high cost. Spending more money on education without direction is perhaps least effective of all. Worse still, many of the policies we've been pursuing, such as school collaboration, are at present little more than guesswork, with little or no supporting evidence. What Professor John Van Reenen from Massachusetts Institute of Technology calls policy witchcraft. Thankfully, however, there is one thing which does have an impact: teacher quality. Research consistently shows that the quality of instruction, which in turn depends on the knowledge, skills, and disposition of teachers, is a powerful determinant of pupil learning. Indeed, as Eric Hanashek from Stanford University puts it, no other attribute of schools comes close. Moving a child from an average to a top teacher's class means they will learn in 6 months what they would otherwise have taken 12. Moreover, good teachers seem to have a disproportionately strong impact on pupils from disadvantaged homes. Good teachers, therefore, also help to close the gap in attainment. The beneficial effects of good teachers also stretches far beyond the examination hall. Raj Shetty, one of the most influential economists in the world, has calculated that moving a child from a poor quality, bottom 5% teacher, to an average quality teacher increases their lifetime earnings by $250,000. If improving the quality of education is the public policy holy grail, teachers are the ones who will find it for us. A little bit further. For our children to thrive as adults, then, our teachers need to thrive in the classroom. For all those involved in education, from the Secretary of State down to the Parent-Teacher Association, there should be no greater priority than nurturing and retaining brilliant teachers. We should be offering them the best possible training, supporting them in any way we can, and systematically removing any burdens which stand in the way of their success. Precisely the opposite is the case. Improving the quality of our teaching workforce has rarely, if ever, been a genuine priority for government. Announcing a policy to improve teaching quality is neither concrete nor intuitive. Indeed, all too often, the zeal with which policymakers have pursued other reforms has only served to make life harder for teachers. Box-ticking demands, real or imagined, from the school inspectorate, ceaseless curriculum reform, disruptive top-down reorganizations, and an audit culture that requires teachers to document their every move have caused a huge increase in administrative workload and a drop in morale. Instead of rolling out the red carpet for our teachers, we've been pulling it out from under their feet. This is the first sense in which we face a teacher gap, the disparity between what we know about the importance of teachers and how we treat them. I'm going to pause there, but there are some other juicy bits. What are your thoughts so far?
There is so much you could pick up on there. I think especially at the time we are at the moment, when obviously we're looking at kind of elections and manifestos for education and that kind of thing. And actually today on the Kent Teach website, they've just published what teachers shouldn't be doing to try and reduce that kind of workload. But then if you reflect back on, I think when I first started teaching and they decided to bring PPA in, and there was all of that.
Sorry, PPA means?
Oh, planning, preparation and assessment, sorry.
Which is time allocated.
Pardon?
Which is time allocated for teachers to get their work done.
You know, we were given that, and then there were this whole list of things that we shouldn't be doing, and then it just seems like, well, they've now just released that again, say the things that we shouldn't be doing as teachers, but then who is going to do those things? That's always the kind of question, isn't it, really? And the other thing about saying about teachers and workload, and that's the kind of thing that stood out for me. And it's that whole point at the moment of everything, it's not quite, things aren't quite right, are they? You know, they want to recruit this, you know, Labour want to recruit however many teachers, but it's the retention of teachers. You know, if you look in our community, how many higher quality teachers have left to become tutors? Actually, how about looking at retention of those higher quality teachers rather than trying to recruit new teachers to just put them into the same situation? It's like this cycle of ongoing, nobody can really make a decision as to what actually needs to be done within education. We just go around in this whole cycle of, you know, I've been a teacher for just over 20 years, and already, you know, it's whatever happened there, go round a bit, and then it goes back full circle, and then we, you know, all the time. So yeah, there was lots of things in there I think you can pick out to talk about, and I actually think I might buy that book myself.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to read it.
It's a heavy read because every single sentence is powerful and informative, but it is a small and mighty one. Who else would like to dive in and give us their initial thoughts, please?
I'm happy to, if you guys are happy. So I agree, there was loads in that could be picked up on. I think the thing that resonated with me was highlighting the really superficial nature of any educational reform that's happened so far. And it's all very kind of photo op-y, let's do this, let's throw money at the problem. And it reminds me, actually, this is very timely because I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Catherine Burble-Singh, who I'm guessing like a lot of you have heard of. And if you haven't, she's seen as Britain's strictest headmistress. But her school is really successful. Cool, brilliant.
I've visited, Rosanna, you should visit.
Really, I'd love to, actually. It's
really
yeah, so interesting. She was talking about this money issue and the idea that, you know, we just need more money. And she was saying, like, don't get me wrong, I'd always love to have more money, but it's about how the money's spent. That's the issue. And I feel like this is a government-wide issue, not to make it like too political in other realms, but governments always talk about, oh, we've spent so much money on this, we've spent so much money on that. But it's about the results. And I think the book has done so far, even in the opening chapter, a really good job of highlighting that gap where it's like you've had so much arguably superficial investment in the form of money, but you're not actually tackling the underlying issues. So I think that was very telling. And again, like Sarah said, it's very timely given the election coming up and what different governments, different parties rather are promising. So that was what stood out to me. It's also
that thing that I know you know about, you know, those universals, right? The fact that this book is probably 15 years old now, and still apt, is informative, and they will come in to discuss policymakers and politicians further. But the idea that non-professional educators could come in and suggest that they can make change quickly and simply, this is a culture issue. And the cultures need to change to make a real difference here. Go on, Sarah.
Sorry, I was just going to pick up on the bit that, you know, where it was talking about, you know, if a child goes into a classroom and maybe the teaching isn't as high quality as another teacher, you know, I'd go to, you know, in any job, you're always going to get people that are better at their job than another. But actually, if we take away some of those stresses, and what I mean by that is all the red tape and the hoop jumping and everything, you know, like documenting every single little thing, actually reduce some of that, and the quality of the teaching will improve, because actually we are there for the children. As a tutor, as a teacher, we are there for the children. They are priority. And if we are being spread so thinly that our time and our energy isn't then able to go into delivering those high quality sessions, then of course, you know, the lessons aren't going to necessarily be as good as what they would be if a teacher has had a good 8-10 hours sleep of a night, because they're up until whatever time. And I think as tutors, that's why so many people are becoming tutors, because that is what you can focus on. So I don't know why my camera keeps going off, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, this is a soapbox conversation. It's fine. Stay on it. You'll like this bit from the beginning of chapter 2. The title of this chapter is Teacher Expertise, Learning to Cha-Cha on a Ship Full of Moldy Fruit. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But she says like this at the beginning, and you'll see why it made me think of it, what Sarah said. Imagine that the day after qualification, a junior doctor was expected to manage the same caseload as a consultant doctor and deal with the same range of cases, from the quotidian and mundane to the rare and complex. They were never able to ask for assistance from a more experienced colleague during a consultation or an operation, having to wait until a patient was discharged before getting a second opinion. Indeed, imagine our fresh-faced junior doctor had never learned anatomy and therefore could only partially and sketchily describe to their superiors the problems they'd encountered in the previous lesson. Worse, when they observed their consultant treating patients effectively and tried the same techniques themselves, they often just didn't have the same effects. And imagine if the minute after they qualified, they were given little or no further academic training or examinations and could quite feasibly go through the whole career without updating their knowledge once. Dee, would you mind unpacking the metaphor for us, please?
I'm getting flashbacks.
Go on.
I qualified as a teacher. I did my PGC in 2004-05. I'm still struggling to get my head around the fact that it is now 20 years since I started to embark on my PGCE, and I lasted 2 years in a secondary classroom, and I famously said to my mentor at my second school placement, I want to be a teacher because I want to teach, not because I want to do riot control. And he raised one eyebrow at me. And then I stepped into a classroom for the first time, having done stuff during my PGC about classroom management and all the rest of it, and realized that it didn't matter how brilliant a teacher I was if I couldn't actually engage the 30 people who were sat in the room with me. And that created as much stress for me as all the other stuff that I was dealing with. And that metaphor's absolutely right. I was in a classroom as a qualified teacher, having to do all of this stuff without actually having all the tools that I needed to do the job that I wanted to do.
I agree with you. And my heart's thumping as you describe that, because that cracks you as a person. That's feeling.
I still don't know how I actually lasted 2 years.
Right. And there's another part to that as well, which is that as a school leader, I have been guilty of throwing people into the deep end many, many times. And no matter how much hovering and support and conversations before, during, and after I was providing, it wasn't nearly enough. And if you think about the structures of medicine, and she goes on to say that she's not suggesting that education should be like medicine because they're different, but there's no structure of ability and training. So when Sarah is saying, I wish I'd had 8 hours sleep, there's also, I wish I'd had 8 hours experience, 8 years experience. You know what I mean? So there's a lovely graph.
Oh, we do like a graph.
I know. Georgina's perked up now. There's a graph. Okay. So the x-axis is years of experience and the y-axis is mathematical achievement of the students. So how much progress the students make based on the years of experience of a teacher. Georgina, can you tell me what you see, please?
At the beginning, it must be terrifying to be a maths teacher.
Welcome to my world.
And then it very quickly gets easier, and then it doesn't really change much. For some reason, later on in their career, they have another little spike. I guess they kind of get over the behavior management stuff and it's less about the maths. But look at that. The beginning is...
And if you think about it, you know, the children who are there in her teaching experience are really, really not given a chance, are they? Interestingly, after 10 years, there's a significant plateau. It continues that plateau. And that's interesting to unpack also. Sarah, I don't know if you've read that there used to be articles in the TES all the time about the elephants on staff, those sort of old experienced teachers that it was lovely to have around because they gave you their sort of wisdom. Yeah. And you think about all those NQTs that are cheaper to employ. And so staff rooms are full of NQTs who then break after 2 years, like Dee. Go on, Sarah.
it's just, that's when it's so important to have the balance right within school, because you need the older staff who have got that experience to be able to pair up with those staff who are less experienced. Doesn't mean to say that as an experienced member of staff you aren't going to learn, because actually they're fresh, they've got lots of new ideas, they've got different ways of teaching. So it really is finding a balance. I feel that, you know, if you've got a staff that are all newly qualified or early career teachers, sorry,
Yeah.
You know, they might be full of enthusiasm and got lots of ideas, but actually it's the kind of the behaviour management side of it that perhaps they might need some support with, or the everyday day-to-day tasks that you still in your training don't realise have to be done because you're a little bit sheltered from those kind of things still. But in the same way, you don't just want a school which is full of experienced stuff that don't want to potentially change and move on. So it's a real balance, isn't it, between trying to help each other develop. It doesn't matter how long you've been teaching, you can always learn new things. And I think as a tutor, my camera, I literally have, it keeps turning itself off. I have no idea what's going on. I'm so sorry. And it keeps making me go off.
But as we've said before, it's such a good picture that we really don't mind. But it was taken at bet.
Yes, I was definitely taking it back. Yeah, it's just finding a real balance, and everyone can learn from each other. And again, that's why being part of QT is such a beneficial thing, because you're asking experienced tutors for what they think about things, and you know, a new tutor comes on and they say, oh, like, we've tried this, what do you think? And you know, you can all learn from each other, that you never stop learning. And it's just, you have to invest in your own kind of self-development, don't you? And I think that's where it's sometimes lost in schools and things like that as well, isn't it?
I think that's right. And you've really touched something very personal for me, because that's why I started Qualified Tutor. I was in a school that was so lovely, but very, very fixed. And there was only so much I could do. And what I wanted to create was culture. And so, you know, the QT house rules of be curious, be generous, and be reflective are exactly what you've just said, which is to say, you can have all the experience in the world, but you can still learn something from a novice. You know, and if you've got that mindset, then we can all learn from each other. So here's another graph, my lovelies. Sorry, can someone take a minute in the chat to catch Jan up? You've got 3 lines here. So we've looked already at this graph, and we know that the bottom axis is years of experience and the y-axis is mathematical attainment. These 3 different lines are, the dotted line is, the dashes line is teachers in schools that just make it into the top 25 of the most supportive schools. The solid line is the teachers who are in schools that just make it into the top 50 of the most supportive schools. And the dotted line at the bottom is the top 75% of most supportive schools. So, Dee, would you mind interpreting this graph for us, please? No, first you have to unmute.
So there is a detectable impact of teachers being supported in their schools, and it has very little impact at the beginning, which is interesting, in the first year or 2, and has a bigger impact after about 3 or 4 years.
Wow, that was beautifully read. Thank you. I actually hadn't spotted that. And Georgina did that to me as well. I'm not used to reading graphs, and I was just looking over here, but you're telling a story of the journey. And that's really interesting. Anybody else want to share what they're noticing on this? So for me, it's very much about what supportive means, right? How do you create that supportive environment? And for us as educators who are working outside school, you know, and some of us are qualified teachers and some of us aren't, we are in an interesting position in terms of supportiveness. What is our role in creating supportive cultures that enable these teachers and their students? Do we have a place in that relationship?
I feel like I probably I'm a little bit novice to the conversation. I never worked in a classroom, and I'm very grateful for that when I hear about other people's experiences. But some of what you shared, the very beginning part of what you read, saying that we've got emergency services and then we've got teachers, is a terrifying perspective, because if we feel like teachers are supposed to pick up everything that isn't the job of the emergency services, they're basically everybody's parents, and that's not really possible. It's supposed to be about education. When we're working as tutors, we have the opportunity to develop very personal relationships with the families that we work with. And it's the families, it's not just the student that shows up. So if there are things beyond education, we've got a much better opportunity to identify there's a safeguarding concern, or this doesn't go as far as a safeguarding concern, but this family maybe needs a bit more emotional support than educational support, or this family's struggling financially and me charging them for their tuition is probably not what they need right now. Direct them somewhere else. But there needs to be something between a maths teacher and the police. We can't really put all of that responsibility on classroom teachers who, as everybody has shared, already have enough to deal with just to be able to send their students home with maths knowledge. They can't be looking after their well-being as well.
So then to come back to our idea of it takes a village, and it's certainly in the last few years taken a village to support my family. There's a reality to that, and what's our place in there? You know, if if the child that you're working with has a teacher who's here somewhere, you know, and if she's lucky, if they're lucky, they're going to end up in a supportive school, but if they're not, then they're not. These children, and don't forget, even when the teacher makes progress, the child is moving on to the next class and the next class and the next class, and the environment continues to be an unsupportive one for the adults that are working with them. What's our place? What's our place as tutors within that village? This isn't where I thought I was going with this, but it's really juicy. Go on, Sarah.
I think it's more direct support. I think probably what Georgina was saying, it's more it's much more specific, isn't it? The support that we're able to give to families. And I think, you know, I know sometimes tutors are able to build up a relationship with schools, and they might share that information with them, but I still think they're I mean, this could just be my experience, but I still feel that schools very much feel that, oh, the tutor said that, you know, but we are highly qualified professionals who are able to support those children. So I think if the partnerships can develop further, but not everybody wants that. As a tutor, every tutor might not want that. Families might not want that. Depends on what the relationships are. And schools, you know, they haven't really got time to feed back all that information. But if it was a more kind of all-round holistic approach where you're looking at the whole child, I think if that could be somehow embedded, then there is definitely a place for tutors to work and communicate with schools. But it depends on it's all about relationships, isn't it?
It's all about relationships, and I think holistic is a really, really powerful idea to bring in here. The whole child and the whole environment around the child. It's significant to me that as we've landed in this point in a conversation, it feels a little bit like uncharted territory. It feels a little bit like, are we overstating our place to say that we as tutors can support the teacher gap? That becomes quite uncomfortable for me, which I think is important. And I think that next year we could have the same conversation and it would feel less uncomfortable, because we would have grown into that relationship, into that space with more confidence. And to illustrate that, Georgina, will you forgive me if I call on you for a second again, because that what you've just said there about, I know you well enough and have known you for long enough to know that what you just said there is born of lots of years of experience. Yeah. So comparing the support that you provide to families to emergency services, and I think the journey that you've come in having the confidence to say that you can notice all of these things and signpost and refer in those ways, which is a little bit this journey. Would you mind?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have done that at the beginning. I didn't even feel confident that I could share my science knowledge with Key Stage 3 age students. So I wasn't going to be having a conversation with a parent about a safeguarding concern or calling the police. But I think the from what I see, for people when talk about people, students talk about their experiences in school, and people here talk about their experiences of being classroom teachers, and then I talk to parents about whatever challenges they have with communicating with schools and knowing how to support their parents. There's like the academic side of it, which is what everything's very much focused on, and then there's a gap in the whole well-being side of things where there's all of this effort that I see as a grown adult to encourage people to talk about their feelings and to seek support when they need it. But I know full well that when I was a 12-year-old girl and needed support with my well-being, there was no chance I was going to go and speak to my maths teacher and say, I'm having a bad day, can you help me? Not a chance. I did see someone talking about having well-being posts, like dedicated well-being posts in school. That was somebody's campaign message. Sounds lovely, but schools don't even have Senkos, so they're not going to have that, are they? It just that is something like that in the middle is needed, and I saw it at the other end with the emergency responses answering 999 calls from people who said my child's run away and I don't know where they are. The school has just told me they've run out of the class, and the police will go and bring the child back to the school because it's usually very easy. They've run to the shops or they've run to their parents' house, take them back to school, have a conversation, say you need to be referred to child services, and then leave. And then it'll happen again and again. And I've actually heard people say when their child is struggling to engage with school, tell them to run away so that the police get involved, so that we get the support that we need. I mean, it all is showing us that there's a role missing for somebody to support students, to give them smaller classroom spaces so that they can actually have the dedicated support and attention that we're able to give them as tutors, but we're still not qualified to help. We can see what they need. We can't give it to them. I might have a soapbox too.
That was just, thank you.
I think from what Georgina said is that it is that holistic overview of the child. And if somebody in government is ever listening to those people, tutors, teachers, whoever that works in education or social care and things, a school can be a really powerful place with the right support that's there. But you're only going to get the right support if schools have access to mental health workers, counselling, if they have ed psychs available more often, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists. If each school was their own hub, these children would be able to access support much, much quicker because it is instant support rather than, even if we're referring on, however that may be, and they go into onto a waiting list, which is 4 or 5 years down the line. 4 or 5 years, these children are becoming adults. It's it's a holistic point. It's the holistic view that needs to be taken, and it has to happen in schools. I'm not saying teachers, but I'm saying the right professionals available within schools for children to access that instant help.
Rosanna, dive in.
I totally agree with what's being said, and I think all of this points to, going back to what we were talking about earlier, governments and their priorities. And from my impression, it's all about numbers, and they don't really like the word pastoral because that's not about numbers. It's harder to quantify all of that. So yeah, I completely agree. I think all of this is like a really good way to think about it, holistic care. And like you say, not necessarily the teachers, but just having that support in place. My only kind of issue with this is that I feel like a lot of this isn't necessarily going to be able to be covered by the remit of the school. So even if you got in like the best therapists and lots of other people, if there is a culture, for example, in a school in a certain area where, for example, education isn't valued in the families that are sending their kids to school reluctantly in some cases, then I'm not quite sure how any amount of provision in the school will get rid of that issue, if that makes sense. So and I'm basing that on a personal example where I worked in a school as a tutor, and I remember having a conversation with one of the teachers, and she was like, the fact of the matter is, these kids are at school because they have to be. Their parents don't even want them here. They don't see school as important. They don't see education as important. They've sent their kids here very reluctantly because they're obliged to, not because they want to. And I feel like in that case, the school's got a real uphill battle. And I'm not quite sure how any amount of provision in the school will tackle that cultural family dynamic and the issue of the kind of culture that school is in, if that makes sense. So I feel like, go ahead.
There's a lot to unpack there, and maybe a different time we will have a conversation about the evidence around the impact that the home has on education, which is on learning outcomes, which is of course far, far greater than the impact of school. And that's a really, really juicy one that we can unpack together. I want to just pull back because I wanted to buy this book. I want to pull back because I want to share. She comes up with 3 definitions of a teacher gap, and we just covered one, which was the disparity between what we know about the importance of teachers and how we treat them. The second one, this is how she presents it. Our failure to give teachers the support they need to thrive in the classroom has a predictable consequence. They leave it. The brutal asymmetry between the pressures we've placed on our teachers and the support we give them has led to an epidemic of burnout in the classroom and an exodus from the profession, far in excess of what we see in other European countries. Perhaps most shockingly, around 40% of those who decide to spend several £1,000s and 2 years of their life to train as teachers are no longer working in publicly funded schools 5 years later. This is an unforgivable waste of human potential. Taxpayers' money, we spend £700 million a year training teachers, and of the transformative potential of good teaching. This failure to retain early career teachers forces the government to raise their target for recruiting teachers each year. Sound familiar? But each year we miss the target by a larger margin. A 1% deficit in 2013, a 5% deficit in 2014, and a 9% deficit in 2015. This is the second sense in which there is a teacher gap, the difference between the number of teachers we need and the number we have. With your permission, I'm going to go slightly further. One of us, Becky, has personal experience of this. She worked in an investment bank after graduating to pay off student debts and learn how the economy really works, something an economics degree doesn't teach you. However, it was never her intention to stay in a job with so little moral purpose. So in 2002, she quit to train as a teacher. While the job was everything she'd hoped it would be in the sense that it was meaningful and watching pupils learn was rewarding, she also felt ill-prepared by her training. In her first teaching job, it quickly became clear that there was no instruction available as to how to get better as a teacher. Indeed, it was not clear that anyone much cared if she did. There was precious little mentoring available. Her school just expected her to plod away year after year, learning, or not, through trial and error. It was because of this that despite being hard work, teaching never really felt like a challenge, just frustrating. So Becky left the classroom to do a PhD in the economics of education, and 14 years later is still crunching data and conducting research to try to better understand pupils, teachers, and education policy. Just for your information, Becky is one of the 2 geniuses behind TeacherTap. So if you've seen the TeacherTap app, where teachers vote every day on various surveys around what's happening in schools, Becky's one of the people behind that. Professor Koh's analysis suggests that Becky's experience is likely to be widespread. If teachers are the most important influence in a child's progress at school, but progress has stalled, we need to look at what is happening in the teaching profession. To be very clear, there are literally thousands of brilliant teachers in England. We've been lucky enough to meet many of them while writing this book. However, if we are to eliminate illiteracy, raise attainment across the country, and create a richer, happier, and healthier nation, we need to see a sustained, widespread increase in the quality of teaching. This is the third and most important sense of the teacher gap, the difference between the quality of teachers we currently have and the quality of teachers we want. This is what's going on in the schools of your students. Not every teacher is quality, is part of the issue. Lots of teachers are quality and they're not being given the incentives to stay, is part of the issue. And every child that we work with is collateral damage in that state of play, in that status quo. Yeah, and I know that you're very new to this conversation because you haven't got experience as a qualified teacher and because you came in late, but I really wanted to give the opportunity to contribute because usually you you bring a new perspective and curiosity. So what are your thoughts at this stage?
Yeah, honestly, I don't have any experience teaching in a school, even in China. So I don't know what might be the factors that lead to the burn of teachers and also the high rate of quit. But I assume, I don't know whether, like, first of all, salary might be one of the reasons. Like, the teachers are not well paid in the schools for the amount of work they do. And then the other factor could be, I don't know, like in the UK, probably the students are more rebellious in some way than the students in China. Um, because of the cultural differences, probably because in China, since it's a, I would say, more hierarchical society than in the UK. So students are supposed to be very respectful to their teachers. So no student would dare to insult the teachers in the classroom or anywhere else. But I've heard from some of my like UK teacher friends who have experienced insults from their students. Yeah.
Once or twice?
I don't know how many times, but
Even
yeah,
in primary school.
yeah, it happened to her.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really, really interesting that the of course the cultural differences and the hierarchical nature of the society that will create, it will reduce the pressure of classroom management, which, as Dee said before she had to leave, is key to being able to teach, of course. I think you'll find this informative. So I told you that chapter 2 is called Teacher Expertise, Learning to Cha-Cha on a Ship Full of Moldy Fruit. And the reason why she calls it that is because she compares teacher training to packing for a long voyage and only packing fruit. What would be the problem with that, Jenna?
Everything.
Go on. Go on.
That is a recipe for killing everyone.
Right, because the fruit's going to go moldy, and by the time you actually need to eat it, there's no sustenance there for you. So front-loading training is like packing fruit for a long voyage. It won't sustain you for the long journey. So what she argues for there is a long-term development plan. I guess that's what the ECT, the Early Careers Training route, and this is after my time because I left just before they launched that, would be presenting for teachers. There's also a focus on teacher retention, on teacher hiring, on teacher motivation, and Jan mentioned teacher pay. And there is not a strong association between teacher motivation and teacher pay. In fact, teachers get disincentivized by financial rewards. There's a lot of it. Go on, Sarah.
Sorry, did you say this book is 15 years old?
This book was published 2018.
Oh,
So not 15 years old, 6 years old, but
yeah,
it could easily be 15-year-olds as well.
Yeah, I don't know why I thought you said that at the start, but I just
Yeah,
it just goes to show that nothing's changed. Really.
just goes to show that nothing's changed. That's right. Teacher development, teacher workload, and then teaching teachers. And the subtitle there is what policymakers can do without waiting for schools. Now, we are not policymakers, nor are we schools. But I believe that there are things that we can do as proactive people who care immensely about education, about our students, and about learning outcomes and how they affect our whole society. I believe that there are things that we can do. And part of it is engaging in this conversation. But I'd love to hear what, as we wrap up, because it's now 11:49, I want to go around the room and I want to hear some of your insight, closing thoughts, what you want to do next about this book, whether it's sort of sown some seeds, which I hope it has. Georgina, you've got your thinking face on. Can I call on you first?
Yeah, I just thought that you've got me into a danger zone where I'm going to do something stupid, because last year I decided to go and work in the police control room, and this year I saw an advert for somebody to work for the local council's child services, and I'm going to do something stupid. So take away my internet access.
You know what? If Georgina could just go around with her magic wand, just waving it over the different services, we'd all be fine.
It just stresses me out, and then I think, this is a mess, and leave. It's not helpful.
Yeah, do you know what? So interesting. I had a very long conversation with the secretary at my 12-year-old school last week, for all the reasons that you do end up having long conversations and defending the secretary in the school. And she's a darling. And she said that before she was working in school, she was working in the NHS, and she was a secretary and administrator in the children's ward in a hospital, and she had to leave. She went because she wanted to be able to help and make a difference. But eventually she found that she was making life and death decisions because she was deciding who was going to get an operation and who wasn't. Or she was having to phone families to let them know that an operation that they were expecting had just been cancelled. And she said she felt that she was totally out of her depth and couldn't be in that position anymore. So she left to work in the school, which, which prime and fires. But I do think it's important to think about those people who step into environments intending to be able to help, and how to create cultures where they can be successful and live the life that they want to live as contributors.
It's helpful. I think the reason why the people making decisions make decisions that don't help is because they don't have experience of the help that's needed. And ultimately, it would be really helpful if teachers went and worked in child services and police and government positions, but they would have a mental breakdown within a few months. So that's why they don't.
Well, if we could just put the politicians in each of those positions before we gave them any power, then that would be informative. And also the journey.
Can we just make Rishi Sunak a maths teacher next year? See what happens.
No comment. Rosanna, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot to think about. I think it's really easy to understand how people can become quite jaded, and they go in with the best of intentions to all these various areas, and then they just feel really disillusioned, and like they lose hope. And I think the only thing I can kind of fall back on, because like Georgina said, without people that have this experience going into government, it feels like there's little practical impact, but maybe it's just a case of focusing on what you can control. And sometimes it might be the case of like making the best of a bad situation and just trying to work out things that you can do. And one thing that I found has been helpful in my experience as a tutor is that when I've got students saying, I've had a million teachers and, I've not been able to really get to grips with this A level or this GCSE because I've had so many teachers, that's the retention issue. Just empathizing with them and just saying, do you know what, this is a problem that a lot of students are facing. It is really difficult. I had something similar when I was doing my GCSEs, and I feel like that empathy can be quite helpful. It's not necessarily that practical, but just acknowledging what they're going through and knowing that it's a bit of a rough situation.
For me, that's really, really powerful, because we have these close relationships with parents. If we can simply help them to empathize with what the systemic issues are that are causing teachers and children to have these experiences, it makes everything feel more innocent. They're not doing it on purpose. This is the situation that they've been dealt, right? And I think that empathy goes a long, long way to improving the culture. Jan, to answer your question, the first gap was we don't respect teachers enough. The second gap was we don't retain teachers effectively. And the third gap is we don't develop teachers sufficiently. Sarah, do you want to go next?
I can't remember the exact question that you asked. I think
it was what are your sort of closing thoughts or opening thoughts? What seeds have been planted here?
Well, I definitely I am going to buy the book or on Audible and listen to it whilst I'm out walking or something, because I think it really gets you thinking about the whole system. Yeah, I mean, I would love to be able to go in and work with schools to help deliver like training for staff. That's something I'd absolutely love to do. And whether I get there or not, I don't know. But that's something I
Why would you not?
About. Pardon?
Why would you not? If you were a teacher and somebody like you came in to deliver their expertise, would you gobble that up?
Yeah.
To do it.
Yeah, I just feel so that whole thing around teacher training. I started off at a really difficult school. I had no idea. I literally had no idea what I was doing. I knew the content I had to teach. And so I feel really passionately about that. And it's something I would just really love to be able to do is to just go in and work with either early career teachers or TAs and just really upskill them so that they feel that they're more prepared. So I think that's really made me think again that it is something that's needed. It's how it's kind of packaged up and offered to schools, really.
I'm so glad that that's what's happened here, because just like Rosanna's insight, I think that that's taking your specific USP and bringing it to this great big problem, and noticing that nothing's changed enough yet, that this is still the timely problem. I know that as a school leader, if you'd come to me, I would have absolutely snapped you up. And I think it's also that idea, and this is sort of, when I left school to develop qualified tutor, I felt guilty. Many of us have. When we leave school, we feel really guilty. And finding a way to give back to those people who are literally holding the building up, is an important part of who we are. And it's an important part of building our expertise. So if you think about that plateau that we looked at, how do you make sure that you're not that person? You go and deliver CPD in schools and give yourself a whole new learning curve. But we know that we're responsible for our professional development, and we need to give ourselves those challenges and be those people. So go for it, Sarah. Jan?
Yeah, I feel like I missed the first part, but
Sure.
yeah, after hearing the summary about the 3 gaps, I just feel like once again I feel the disappointment about how teachers are treated in a society. Education is supposed to be one of the most powerful ways to advance a society, but as the teachers, educators, we're not paid enough attention to by the society. So yeah, I think definitely there should be more, I don't know, whether regulations or whatever, to provide more support to the teachers so that overall the society can benefit.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you joined us, because I think you absolutely got what I was trying to share. I'm going to wrap up with this. My why is developing the adults that support the children, because that's where I've placed my lever, right? You know that lovely phrase, I think it's Aristotle, give me a long enough lever and a place on which to put it, and I can move the world. Yeah, each of us have to place our energies in a really specific focused place so that we can make things slightly better. And if each one of us do that, then that's grassroots change, and we're not waiting for policymakers. As you know, for me, it's all about making sure that people feel safe, skilled, and supported. And I know that if I'd felt safe, skilled, and supported, I'd still be in the school. I know that if my teachers had felt safe, skilled, well, I know that my reason for being was making sure that they felt safe, skilled, and supported. And I know that if we could create cultures where people feel safe, skilled, and supported, and part of that is Rosanna's, insight around empathizing and telling the parents, it's not an us and them situation. Yeah. And part of it is Sarah's idea of going in and skilling those teachers up. Anything that we can do to help the people in the buildings to feel safe, skilled, and supported is well worth our time. Thank you so much for participating in this conversation. I hope it was insightful and valuable. Thank you if you're watching on LinkedIn. Seems to be that we have quite a few people watching on LinkedIn nowadays, so that's really quite fun. Please note that next Tuesday is World Tutors Day, 2nd of July. We have created World Tutors Day to make sure that tutors are celebrated and recognised. There are a few ways that you can get involved. We have local meetups happening for tutors all over the world, from Albania to Vietnam. There's a list of events that are already registered on our website, and if you want to host an event where you are, that's completely awesome. Go for it. If you would like us to list your event, please register it on the form, which is on our website, qualifiedtutor.org. There is also a whole suite of free CPD that has been crowdsourced from the qualified tutor community and beyond. We've got awesome insights on parenting support, on uni admissions, on everything super nerdy in maths, English, and science and humanities, and some of the business of tutoring focus, and then the general pedagogy of teaching and learning. So there's a lot of juicy insights there. There's also a digital goodie bag with some really valuable discounts that you might want to grab hold of and make use of. All of that is free for you as a tutor. Go to qualifiedtutor.org and sign up. And next Tuesday, I will be live on LinkedIn all day. interviewing and speaking with different people in this kind of way, exploring ideas. So whatever you're doing, if you're walking the dogs or whatever else, just tune in and you can participate in the conversation. Thanks so much, as always, for helping us to raise standards in tutoring together. And I hope you have a lovely, sweltering weekend. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Georgina.